The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the towering glass skyscraper, scattering golden rays across the polished marble floors. Outside, the city hummed with life. Taxis weaved through traffic, pedestrians hurried along the avenues, and the faint smell of coffee and street food drifted upward from the bustling streets below. Inside, the world seemed quieter, controlled, deliberate. In the corner office, barely noticeable to anyone passing by, sat Amara, the wife the world had long forgotten. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, reviewing financial reports, strategic memos, and global market trends with a precision that could make even the most seasoned executives pause. She leaned back for a moment, her eyes scanning the skyline, and allowed herself a subtle, satisfied smile. No one in the city, and certainly not her husband, had any idea of the empire she quietly commanded. Her assistant, a young man with meticulous hair and polished shoes, approached with a stack of folders. "Ms. Amara, the quarterly projections from the European branch just came in," he said softly, careful not to disturb the calm aura she carried. Amara took the folders with a nod, her voice calm yet authoritative. "Thank you, Malik. Make sure the numbers align with our risk models before the board meeting tomorrow. And cross-check with the Asia-Pacific division. They've been underreporting revenue again." Malik hesitated for a second, admiration evident in his gaze. "Yes, ma'am. It's incredible. How you keep track of everything, even when no one outside this office realizes it." Amara's smile was fleeting, almost wistful. "The world doesn't need to know. It's not about recognition. It's about the work being done and done right." She tapped her pen thoughtfully on the desk, the rhythm steady and deliberate. "And while this quiet empire building continued behind the scenes, let me ask you something. If you enjoy powerful stories like this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves dramatic stories of power and betrayal. And tell me in the comments, do you think Daniel will regret ignoring his wife? Because this story is only just beginning." A faint breeze drifted through the slightly ajar window, carrying the scent of the city. Fresh bread from the bakery across the street, exhaust from early commuters, and the earthy aroma of rain-dampened trees in the city park nearby. Amara inhaled deeply, letting the sounds and smells ground her, a silent reminder that her world, though hidden, was intricately connected to every pulse of the city below. She turned back to her documents, her eyes sharp and calculating, scanning spreadsheets as though reading between the lines of human behavior itself. Outside, life moved on unaware. Drivers honked, street vendors shouted greetings to regulars, and a newspaper boy on the corner waved a copy about stock fluctuations. Yet here, above it all, Amara was in control, the invisible hand guiding billions without a single soul suspecting. As she sealed the last folder and placed it neatly on her desk, her phone buzzed with a notification. A hint of a developing issue in the company that demanded attention. Amara straightened, her expression calm but alert. The day was just beginning, and unseen forces were already moving in the shadows. Little did anyone know, the quiet woman in the corner office would soon shift the balance of power entirely. Her husband and his mistress unaware that the true ruler of the empire was right there, meticulously watching, waiting, and planning her next move. The city looked very different at night. Where the morning had been calm and disciplined, the evening glittered with indulgence. Neon lights reflected off rain-slick streets. Luxury cars lined the entrance of a five-star rooftop restaurant, and soft jazz music floated through the warm air. At a private table overlooking the glowing skyline sat Daniel, a man who carried himself with the careless confidence of someone who believed the world already belonged to him. Across from him sat Sophia, the woman who had quickly become the center of his attention, and his weakness. She swirled the sparkling wine in her glass, her elegant gold dress shimmering under the dim candlelight. The wind gently lifted her long hair as she leaned forward with a curious smile. "So," Sophia said softly, her voice smooth and playful, "you're really giving me control over part of the company?" Daniel chuckled, leaning back comfortably in his chair. Below them, the city buzzed with traffic, street vendors calling out to late-night customers, and music drifting from nearby clubs. "It's not just part," he said proudly. "You deserve more than that." He slid a sleek black folder across the table toward her. Sophia raised an eyebrow and opened it slowly. Inside were official documents, authorizations, financial access, executive privileges. Her eyes widened slightly. Daniel, this is serious power. Daniel waved his hand dismissively. Relax, he said with a confident grin. My company is worth $65 billion. A few decisions here and there won't shake it. He took a sip of his drink, completely unaware of the storm his arrogance was slowly creating. Sophia studied the documents again, a quiet ambition flickering behind her smile. And your wife? She asked casually. Does she know about this? Daniel scoffed. My wife, he repeated with a hint of annoyance. She doesn't understand business. She never has. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a joke. She lives in her quiet little world. Numbers and strategy bore her. Trust me, she has nothing to do with the empire I built. Sophia nodded slowly, though something in her eyes suggested she was thinking far more deeply than she let on. Then I suppose, she said, signing the first page, I'll help you run it. Daniel smiled proudly, completely satisfied with his decision. Around them, the restaurant continued buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the distant sound of a violinist playing near the bar. But far above the glittering nightlife, in a silent office tower across the city, a woman was already studying the company's numbers, already noticing unusual activity, already watching. And while Daniel believed he was giving his mistress power over his empire, he had no idea that the true architect of that empire had just noticed the first crack in the foundation, and she was about to respond. The headquarters of Ardent Global, a company whose influence stretched across continents, rose proudly above the city like a monument to wealth and ambition. Its glass walls reflected the bright afternoon sun, and inside, hundreds of employees moved quickly through polished corridors, carrying files, tablets, and cups of hurried coffee. But today something felt different. In the executive floor's largest office, the one that once belonged only to the most trusted leaders, Sophia sat behind the massive walnut desk. She leaned back in the high leather chair, slowly turning it from side to side as she admired the breathtaking view of the skyline through the tall windows. Far below, the city roared with traffic, buses, and street vendors calling out to passers-by. From up here, it all looked small, manageable. Just like the company she believed she now controlled. A group of senior managers sat across from her, exchanging uncertain glances while waiting for her to speak. Sophia tapped her manicured nails against the desk confidently. So, she began smoothly, crossing her legs, I've reviewed the numbers from the Asian Logistics Division. One of the managers, Mr. Patel, cleared his throat politely. Yes, ma'am. Those operations are extremely sensitive. We usually consult the strategic board before making any adjustments. Sophia waved her hand dismissively. Boards move too slowly, she said with a slight smile. Success comes from bold decisions. She slid a document across the desk. We're cutting their operational budget by 15% and redirecting the funds into luxury brand partnerships. It will make the company image more glamorous. The managers froze. Mr. Patel hesitated. But ma'am, that division manages nearly 40% of our global supply chain. Sophia tilted her head slightly, her smile tightening. Are you questioning my judgment? No, of course not, he said quickly. She leaned forward confidently. Then make the changes. The staff nodded reluctantly, though the tension in the room was impossible to hide. As the meeting ended, the managers quietly gathered their files and stepped into the hallway. One of them whispered under his breath, "This is a mistake." Another shook his head. She doesn't understand the structure of the company. Inside the office, Sophia remained seated, pleased with herself. She opened another file, barely scanning the details before signing her name across the approval page. Outside the skyscraper, dark clouds slowly began to gather above the city, casting long shadows over the streets. Traffic thickened. Wind rustled the trees in the nearby park. A storm was coming. And while Sophia believed she was strengthening her influence inside the company, each decision she made was quietly loosening the foundation beneath her feet. Because somewhere else in the same building, someone far more experienced had already begun noticing the cracks. High above the restless streets of the city, where the noise of traffic softened into a distant murmur, The quiet office lights still glowed long after most employees had gone home. Inside the elegant corner office, Amara sat calmly behind her desk, the soft glow of her computer screen illuminating the thoughtful focus in her eyes. Outside the window, the city was slowly transitioning into evening. The golden sunset stretched across the skyline, reflecting off glass towers while streetlights flickered on one by one. Vendors along the sidewalks packed away their carts, and the scent of roasted corn and fresh bread drifted faintly through the cool evening air. But inside the office, the atmosphere was calm and intensely focused. Lines of data moved across Amara's screen. Financial projections, supply chain reports, international market trends. Numbers that looked ordinary to most people revealed entire stories to her. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard as she analyzed the latest reports. Then she paused. A small crease formed on her forehead. She murmured quietly. A notification blinked on her screen. It showed the recent budget adjustment from the Asian Logistics Division. The very decision Sophia had made earlier that day. Amara leaned forward slightly, studying the figures more closely. "That's reckless," she said softly. At that moment, Malik, her trusted assistant, entered the room carrying a tablet. "Ma'am, I thought you'd want to see the new executive approvals that came through today." Amara nodded. "I already have," she replied calmly. Malik looked surprised. "And?" She stood slowly and walked toward the massive window, folding her arms as she looked down at the glowing city streets below. "Someone is making decisions without understanding the structure of the company," she said quietly. Malik frowned. "Should we stop it immediately?" Amara shook her head gently. "Not yet." She returned to her desk and began typing a series of commands into the company's secure financial system. Within seconds, subtle adjustments began moving through the company's networks, protective financial buffers, quiet redirections of capital, and safeguards around the most critical divisions. No alarm sounded. No announcements were made. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But deep within the company's financial structure, Amara had just protected billions of dollars. Malik watched in amazement. "You corrected everything in minutes," he said. Amara allowed herself a small smile. "Experience teaches you where problems will appear before they happen." She closed the final report and placed it neatly on the desk. Outside, the first drops of rain began tapping against the windows as night settled over the city. But while the storm gathered in the sky, another storm was slowly forming inside the company itself. And soon, even the board of directors would begin noticing that something inside the empire was no longer running the way it should. The next morning, the sky above the city hung heavy with gray clouds. A cold wind rushed between the towering skyscrapers, rattling the glass walls of Ardent Global's headquarters. Inside the building, the atmosphere felt just as tense. In the massive boardroom on the 40th floor, a long polished table stretched across the room like a battlefield of silent concerns. Screens along the walls displayed company reports, stock charts, and financial summaries that flickered with uneasy red indicators. Several board members sat around the table, their faces serious as they studied the data. One of them, an older man with silver hair and thin glasses, tapped the screen in front of him. "These numbers don't make sense," he said quietly. Another board member leaned forward. "The Asian Logistics Division is losing efficiency. Delivery times have increased, and costs are rising." At the far end of the table, Sophia sat confidently, dressed in a sleek designer suit. She crossed her arms calmly, trying to appear unfazed by the tension filling the room. Before she could respond, the doors opened. Daniel walked in casually, his expensive watch catching the room's bright lights. He carried the relaxed confidence of someone who believed problems were temporary inconveniences. "What's with the serious faces?" he said with a light laugh. "It's just numbers." The silver-haired board member looked at him carefully. "Sir, the numbers represent billions of dollars." Daniel dropped into his chair and waved his hand dismissively. "You're overreacting," he replied. "Companies fluctuate. That's normal." He turned toward Sophia with a reassuring smile. "I trust her decisions." Sophia straightened slightly, pleased by his support. "We're restructuring certain divisions," she explained smoothly. "Short-term pressure creates long-term opportunity." A younger board member frowned. With respect. The changes were made without consulting the strategic committee. Sophia's smile tightened. Leadership sometimes requires decisive action, she said firmly. Silence filled the room. Outside the tall windows, rain began falling steadily, streaking down the glass like quiet warnings. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Something about the situation didn't feel right. Yet Daniel remained completely relaxed. He leaned back in his chair and said confidently, "Our company is worth $65 billion. A few adjustments won't shake an empire." But deep in the system, far beyond the boardroom discussions, subtle financial shifts were continuing. And somewhere else in the building, someone had already noticed the damage. Someone who understood exactly how fragile an empire could become when the wrong hands tried to control it. Soon, the quiet observer behind the scenes would be forced to step closer into the light. Night had fallen over the city, wrapping the skyline in a blanket of glittering lights and drifting clouds. Rain from earlier in the evening had washed the streets clean, and now the wet asphalt reflected the glowing signs of cafes, taxis, and street vendors still serving late customers. Inside a quiet office a few blocks away from Ardent Global's headquarters, a desk lamp cast a warm circle of light over piles of documents and an open laptop. Behind the desk sat Ethan Cole, a financial journalist known for noticing the kinds of details most people ignored. He adjusted his glasses and stared at the screen, where rows of company data from Ardent Global were displayed. "Something isn't right," he murmured. Outside his window, the distant hum of the city mixed with the soft patter of water dripping from rooftops. Ethan scrolled through another report. Quarterly profits, international logistics numbers, executive authorizations. At first glance, the company still looked stable. But hidden beneath the surface were strange patterns, small financial corrections, subtle asset movements, and strategic reversals that seemed to appear out of nowhere. He leaned closer to the screen. "These corrections, they're too precise," he whispered. According to the public records, the company's new executive decisions were coming from Sophia. Yet somehow, every risky move she approved was quietly stabilized before it could cause major damage. Ethan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "That's not luck," he said quietly. "That's intervention." Curious, he opened another encrypted document he had managed to obtain from a confidential source within the company. The file didn't list a name. Only a series of authorization signatures labeled with a mysterious internal code. But the impact of those approvals was undeniable. Whenever the company's structure began to weaken, this unknown figure stepped in, redirecting investments, shielding supply chains, correcting financial exposure. It was like watching an invisible chess player protecting the board while someone else carelessly moved the pieces. Ethan leaned back in his chair slowly. "So who are you?" he whispered. At that exact moment, across the city in the towering glass building of Ardent Global, a single office light still burned on the highest executive floor. Inside that quiet office, Amara stood near the window, her silhouette softened by the glow of the city behind her. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from a secure monitoring system. "External investigation detected." She read the notification calmly. For a moment, she simply watched the rain-soaked streets below, where cars moved like rivers of light through the night. Then she placed the phone down. "Interesting," she said quietly, because somewhere out there, someone had finally begun asking the right questions. And once those questions reached the surface, the truth behind the empire might no longer remain hidden. Morning light crept slowly across the skyline, casting pale gold reflections against the glass walls of Ardent Global's headquarters. The city was waking up, street vendors arranging baskets of fruit, buses rumbling along crowded avenues, and office workers rushing through crosswalks with steaming cups of coffee in their hands. But inside the executive floor, the atmosphere felt heavy. In his office, Daniel sat behind his desk, staring at a stack of financial reports spread across the polished surface. Something about the numbers bothered him. For the past few weeks, Sophia's decisions had clearly caused disruptions. Supply delays, budget misallocations, confused department heads. Yet strangely, the company had not collapsed. In fact, many of the most dangerous risks had somehow been corrected. Daniel flipped through another report, his brows slowly knitting together. That's impossible, he muttered. He pressed the intercom. Send in the financial logs from the internal system, he ordered. Minutes later, a digital file appeared on his screen. Daniel leaned forward, scrolling through rows of data. The corrections had timestamps, authorization codes, silent adjustments that had redirected funds and stabilized divisions just before major losses could occur. His fingers froze on the keyboard. Who approved these? He whispered. The records didn't show Sophia. They showed something else. A private executive clearance code. One that only a founding authority within the company could use. Daniel's heart began beating faster as he opened another archive file. One he had rarely bothered to check before. The company's original structural authorizations. The name attached to the master executive override slowly appeared on the screen. Amara Rahman. For a moment, Daniel simply stared. The quiet office around him felt suddenly too still. Images from the past flashed through his mind. Amara sitting at the dining table late at night, reviewing documents while he ignored her. Amara calmly offering suggestions about company strategy that he had dismissed with a laugh. Amara watching silently during business dinners, her eyes always observant, always thinking. A memory surfaced clearly in his mind. Daniel, she had once said gently, empires aren't built by pride. They're built by patience and structure. Back then he had brushed it off. Now his chest tightened. You, he whispered at the empty office. His wife, the woman he believed had nothing to do with the company, had been quietly holding the entire empire together, while he was handing power to someone who barely understood its weight. Daniel pushed his chair back slowly, the realization crashing over him like cold water. Every correction, every protection, every silent rescue of the company's finances. It had been Amara. And for the first time since he built the company, Daniel felt something unfamiliar creeping into his thoughts. Fear. Because if she had been watching everything all this time, then she already knew what he had done. The evening sky burned with deep shades of orange and purple as the sun slowly disappeared behind the city skyline. Lights flickered on across the towering buildings, and traffic filled the streets below like glowing rivers of red and white. Inside the top executive office of Arden Global, the atmosphere was tense. The glass doors burst open as Daniel stepped inside, his face pale with disbelief and anger. His expensive shoes echoed sharply across the polished marble floor. Standing near the massive window overlooking the city was Amara. She looked calm, completely calm. Her dark hair rested neatly over her shoulders as she gazed down at the busy streets far below, as if she had been expecting him. Behind Daniel, Sophia followed hesitantly, her confidence from earlier meetings now replaced with visible unease. Daniel stopped a few feet away from Amara. You, he said, his voice tight. All this time it was you. Amara slowly turned to face him. Her expression was composed, almost serene. Yes, she replied simply. Daniel threw the financial reports onto the desk. You've been running the company behind my back. Amara glanced at the scattered papers, then calmly looked back at him. Not behind your back, she said quietly. Around your mistakes. The words hit the room like thunder. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, her eyes moving between them. Daniel clenched his fists. You had no right. No right. Amara interrupted gently. She walked toward the desk and opened a digital file on the screen. Financial charts appeared instantly. While you were distracted, she said calmly, someone had to keep the structure from collapsing. She pointed to the data. These corrections saved $3 billion. Another chart appeared. This one protected our international supply chain. She looked directly at him now. And this prevented your latest decision from destroying 40% of the company's logistics. Daniel's anger slowly turned into stunned silence. Sophia stepped forward defensively. Daniel trusted me to make those decisions, she said. Amara turned toward her. For the first time, her calm gaze carried a sharp edge. And that, she said softly, was his greatest mistake. The room fell quiet. Outside the window, a cool evening wind rustled the trees in the park far below while city lights shimmered like stars across the skyline. Amara folded her hands calmly. You believed power was something you could simply give away, she continued. But an empire isn't built on ego. It's built on discipline, strategy, and responsibility. Daniel looked at her differently now, not as the quiet wife he had ignored for years, but as the person who had been protecting everything he thought he controlled. Sophia slowly stepped back, realizing she no longer had any authority in the room. The balance of power had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. But the consequences of Daniel's decisions were only beginning to unfold. The following morning, a cold breeze swept through the city as gray clouds hung low above the skyline. The glass tower of Ardent Global stood tall as always, but inside the building, the mood was far from ordinary. Employees moved through the lobby whispering quietly to one another. Rumors had spread overnight, traveling through emails, hallway conversations, and late-night messages. Something big was happening on the executive floor. Inside the boardroom, the long table was once again filled with the company's most powerful decision-makers. Screens displayed updated financial reports, but today no one was focused on numbers. At the head of the table sat Daniel, unusually silent. His confident posture from previous meetings had vanished. Instead, his shoulders were slightly lowered, his expression tense. Across from him sat Sophia. But today, the confident smile she once carried was gone. Her hands rested tightly together on the table, her polished nails pressing into her palm, as if trying to hold on to control that was slipping away. One of the senior board members, Mr. Patel, cleared his throat. After reviewing the recent executive decisions, he began carefully, the board has reached a conclusion. The room fell completely silent. Sophia's eyes shifted nervously toward Daniel, searching for reassurance. But he didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he looked down at the table. Mr. Patel continued. Effective immediately, Sophia will no longer hold executive authority within Ardent Global. The words landed heavily in the room. Sophia's face turned pale. What? She said, her voice sharp with disbelief. You can't do that. Daniel gave me that authority. Several board members exchanged calm, but firm glances. This company operates under structural governance, another director said. Authority can be granted, but it can also be revoked. Sophia turned toward Daniel desperately. Daniel, say something. But Daniel remained silent. For the first time, he understood how reckless his decisions had been, and how much damage they had nearly caused. Behind the glass wall of the boardroom, unseen by most of the people inside, Amara stood quietly in the hallway. She didn't interrupt. She didn't celebrate. She simply watched. Inside the room, Sophia slowly gathered her belongings, the confidence that once surrounded her now completely gone. Without another word, she walked out of the boardroom, her heels echoing faintly down the hallway. Justice had arrived quietly. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes briefly meeting Amara's through the glass. For the first time in years, there was humility in his expression. But the story of the empire, and the lesson it carried, was not finished yet. Dawn arrived quietly over the city. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and pale pink. One by one, the lights in the tall buildings began to fade as morning replaced the night. High above the waking streets, in the top floor office of Ardent Global, Amara stood beside the wide glass window. From there, the entire city unfolded beneath her. Cars moved slowly through early traffic. Street vendors arranged colorful fruits and fresh bread on wooden carts. In a small park nearby, a few runners passed along the tree-lined paths while birds circled in the cool morning air. The city felt alive again. Amara rested one hand gently on the window frame, her gaze calm and thoughtful. For years, she had watched this view while quietly protecting the empire that stood behind her. Every decision, every strategy, every silent correction had been made not for recognition, but for stability. The door behind her opened softly. Daniel stepped inside. His movements were slower than usual, his once confident posture replaced with a quiet humility. For a moment, he simply stood there looking at her. Then he walked forward. I spent years believing I built this company, he said quietly. Amara didn't turn immediately. She continued watching the city below as the sunlight slowly brightened the streets. Finally she spoke. You helped build it, she replied calmly. But building something, and protecting it, are two very different things. Daniel lowered his gaze. I underestimated you, he admitted. Amara turned to face him now, her expression neither angry nor proud, just calm. You didn't underestimate me, she said gently. You stopped paying attention. The words hung in the quiet room. Outside, the city continued waking up, buses filling with commuters, cafe doors opening, and the warm scent of fresh coffee drifting through the streets below. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of his mistakes finally clear. I should have listened, he said. Amara gave a small, knowing smile. Power isn't always loud, she said softly. Sometimes the strongest hands are the ones no one notices. For a moment, both of them stood in silence, watching the sunlight spread across the skyline. The empire still stood, stronger than ever. But now, the truth behind its strength was no longer hidden. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of the waking city, one simple lesson remained clear. True power often works in silence, and respect should never be taken for granted.